Is that a Glacial Fortress? All right, so it looks like we have
Yeah,
some sort of Stoneblade player on the right. He's got a Stoneforge Mystic, Force of Will, seems like a pretty reasonable hand. And on the left, it looks like
it
we have
very
Eldrazi.
nice. Yeah, I see a Thought Knot here and a couple cards that appear to have old borders, which means they're probably soul lands.
Stoneblade is interesting. It's kind of the deck that's fallen off the map a little bit since the advent of Kolaghan's Command Control decks. What's your opinion on the deck?
I agree. It's a little bit outdated. The card quality is certainly high. There's quite a few different ways to build it. I think recently an Esper Stoneblade list had top aided the MKM event over in Europe, and that list was playing with the full 4 Baleful Strix, which is just a powerful card, and I think that's actually one of the reasons why it did well. But you had mentioned Kolaghan's Command, and that card has been seeing quite a bit of play since the Deathrite Shaman banning, and I think that's been doing a very good job of suppressing all Stoneforge Mystic decks. So, the two most notable examples being Death and Taxes, and then I actually think this Stoneblade deck, which, people still love sleeping up.
That's the beauty of Legacy, right? People will play what they love no matter what, no matter how bad.
Yeah, I'm definitely one of those people. I'm still sleeving up Nimble Mongoose, even though it is just very, very outclassed by Gurmag Angler.
So the player on the right tutored up a Batter Skull and luckily had the force for Thought Knots here, which means he's going to be in a relatively good position. Game 1, Eldrazi is, in its essence, a beatdown deck, especially without any of the prison elements early in the game, like Chalice of the Void. So an early 4/4 lifelinker will do a lot to pressure this Eldrazi player, especially with 2 Ancient Tombs in play. Quite a liability sometimes.
Yeah, the damage from Ancient Tomb adds up really quick. Oh, and it actually looks like he has a third in his hand. That also appears to be Wasteland. I think that might be an Ayabugan. Difficult to see, though. And then...
It's a Mishra's
that's
Factory.
a Mishra's Factory, yeah. So, his life total is going to be something to pay very close attention to. This game is probably not going to last a very long time. It's also interesting to note that he kept a hand without a turn 1 play on the draw, which is pretty risky.
Yeah, do you think... What's he on? He was on 7 cards, right? 6, 10 total, turn 3. Yeah, so he was on 7 cards. Do you think that this deck should mulligan more aggressively to a turn 1 Chalice, or is turn 2 Thought Knots here in the dark good enough?
Yeah, I think particularly in game 1, when you're on the draw, you want to mulligan to a turn 1 play. I think it's been my experience with Eldrazi that it spends a lot of time somewhat stealing game 1s, where it just feels like you run roughshod over your opponent. And I think even for Legacy, a turn 2 Thought Knots here on the draw with, without a card like Cavern of Souls to make it uncounterable may even be a little bit too slow. So I think I probably would have preferred to see him make an aggressive mulligan for a turn 1 play.
So Utah found a second Force of Will for that Endbringer. You could have found a Source of Plowshares would have been good enough as well. The fact that Utah has swords is also a big deal for this matchup. There's a lot of very large creatures, and like the Endbringer is especially bad or especially difficult to deal with when you're only playing Fatal Pushes and Lightning Bolts. But this Batter Skull is going to do some heavy damage. Kohei is already at 10 life. We're going to be falling down to 6, so he's already getting at least stone range once here.
Yeah, and the attack with the Stoneforge Mystic implies that he doesn't have another equipment in hand, putting Kohei to 5, and this is now a 1-turn clock. Kohei is going to have some counterplay here, being able to block with the Mishra's Factory, but that's not a way to win the game. Yeah. So let's see what else he has in hand. I think that's an Eldrazi Mimic and possibly a Walking Ballista.
So what kind of tools does this Eldrazi deck have to combat the Stoneforge Mystic after board?
So I think I think a couple of the cards that can see play in the Eldrazi builds, there's actually quite a few different cards. Typically, they're looking for cards like Phyrexian Revoker to actually stop the Stoneforge Mystic from activating and putting Batter Skull in play, or from stopping the equipment like a sword or a Jit to get equipped to a creature. But in general, the Eldrazi deck is actually weak to Stoneforge Mystic in general. It has cards like Dismember to actually kill the Stoneforge Mystic, but once there is an equipment in play, the Eldrazi deck does not have a lot of ways to to actually remove it from play. So a little bit of a weakness, just from the fact that it's only playing colorless cards. The Eldrazi decks do typically play cards like Ratchet Bomb, which is a little bit of a slow answer, especially when you're under a lot of pressure from your own Ancient Tombs, like Kohei is in this game. So a Stoneforge Mystic hitting the table early could be very, very good for Yuta, and it's definitely serving him well this game.
Yeah, definitely a premium draw from the Stoneforge side.
Yeah, a quick Stoneforge with double Force of Will backup for your first 2 plays is just a great draw. Let's see, we have a Snapcaster for a Brainstorm here.
That should be all she wrote.
Yeah, and it looks like we're going to game 2. So what do you think the sort of the keys to the matchup is from the Stoneforge side of the table? We know I don't think we have exact deck lists here, but I think we can probably make some pretty good guesses at what Yuta is playing.
Yeah, so it looked like from the way he was fetching that he was just blue-white, at least main deck. So it's possible that he has a back to basics after board, which would be a devastating silver bullet for the matchup.
Absolutely.
The Eldrazi deck doesn't play any basic lands, so landing that early will have similar impact on the game to what happened in game 1. Is that a main deck Pithing Needle? Wow.
Wow, that's yeah.
Oh no, it looks like he just shoved his sideboard in. All right.
Okay.
But for the most part, the Stoneforge player is going to be looking to either get an early equipment into play like a Batterskull, or an early True Name Nemesis is another card that's difficult for the Eldrazi deck to beat, especially backed up with counter magic like we were saying earlier.
No, there we go. There's the back to basics.
Yep.
Yeah, so the blue-white player definitely has some tools in this matchup, and they even a while look at that Supreme Verdict. Okay, and Teferi, Hero of Dominaria? Wow.
That's spicy. He actually had the Supreme Verdict main deck, which I was surprised about. Ooh. Is that an Isolate? I think it's called. I haven't seen much of that. That's a powerful card, though. I think that's a card that's probably criminally underplayed in Legacy. It's a white mana to exile a card or permanent with CMC 1, I believe.
Permanent with CMC 1. Okay.
Yes, I think it's exactly 1, not 1 or less. And there are a lot of powerful 1 mana permanents in Legacy, so probably a very powerful card. I'm wondering if it's main or side.
I have a feeling that's a sideboard card that can be a little bit specific, and I think it's actually just a dead card against the Eldrazi deck. So there are definitely and it's probably miracles as well. So there are decks in the format where it's just a total blank. Did we see Delvers out of the blue-white player, or is it just pure Stoneblade?
No, I didn't get a perfect look, but I believe it's just pure Stoneblade. I saw a lot of Stoneforge, a lot of True Name Nemesis, and
yeah.
Game 1 he had Supreme Verdict. He actually shuffled it away with a Brainstorm, so I would be shocked if my opponent ever revealed that card to a Delver Secrets.
Yeah. Oh, another thing to note here is that the Eldrazi player is playing Simian Spirit Guides. So some lists opt to not play that card, but Simian Spirit Guide is one of those additional mana sources that you can use to power out an Eldrazi a little bit quicker. So that's something to watch out for.
Yeah, turn it into a little bit more of a turbo deck. Get those haymakers down. I know most people opt to not play Simian Spirit Guide. They find the flushness of Soul Lands is good enough, and it's a bit of a liability going late sometimes, or makes some hands really bad against counter magic. But this player opted to play them.
Yeah, I had done a decent amount of testing with Eldrazi, and what I found was that the deck, it wins because it has a really significant mana advantage against the opponent with the Soul Lands, and the Simian Spirit Guides are just an additional way to push that mana advantage. So I actually found them to be pretty good, but yeah, they definitely fold to things like counter magic. But when you're showing up with Eldrazi, I think you're sort of making that concession anyway. Unless you have a counter of souls, there's a lot of games that you have that are actually very similar to the last one, where you get to make only a couple of relevant plays in the actual game, and they just get countered. So
right. So stemming off of that, like we were saying earlier, that perhaps the Eldrazi deck should have considered having a more powerful early play, especially in the dark on the draw. In these post-board games against Stoneforge, do you think that the Eldrazi player should be looking to find some of their anti-hate cards like Ratchet Bomb or whatever they may have, because the Stoneforge deck is so likely to be flushing them? Or do you think just any relevant early play is good enough?
I think any relevant early play is going to be good enough here. I think I think we're deep into the rounds of the GP, and these players are alive for top 8. They're probably good enough to know that or excuse me, the Eldrazi player is probably good enough to know that he should be expecting back to basics after the first game, because the opponent or his Stoneblade opponent Yuta was aggressively fetching basic lands. So I would expect to see him play around that appropriately here.
So Kohei actually had a really, really powerful hand. He had a Thought-Knot Seer, Chalice of the Void, and a Ratchet Bomb to combat some hate. Unfortunately, he didn't have a Soul Land in his opening hand, but he did draw one on the first turn. So his development is not going to be too slow, and he's going to have a lot of powerful tools this game.
Yeah, interesting to note here is that there's a big difference in being on the play and on the draw here. So even without the advent of a Soul Land on turn 1, he's going to be able to play a Chalice of the Void to slow Yuta down into a Thought-Knot Seer, hopefully taking his back to basics before Yuta is able to produce 3 mana to play it. So Kohei's looking pretty good this game. Let's see, what do we have in hand for Yuta right now?
Something worth noting is that Chalice on 1 is much more devastating against this blue-white Stoneblade deck than it would be against a Grixis Control or a Miracles deck, since the Stoneblade deck is much more reliant on Source of Plowshares in order to maintain tempo in this matchup. And without many answers to Chalice, I'm sure that the Stoneblade deck has a couple copies of Disenchant after board, but without being flush in Kolaghan's commands and such, it's going to be pretty difficult for the Stoneblade player to fight through this, especially with an uncounterable Thought-Knot Seer on this turn.
Absolutely, yeah. And let's see what we have in hand here. Oh, interesting. Yuta choose to keep the back to basics in hand.
Yeah, I think he wanted to shuffle with the Flooded Strand. He could have considered hiding a card which would have been relevant if Kohei had Thought-Knot Seer like he did. But it looks like Yuta has a lot of powerful cards in his hand. He has his back to basics, but he also has a True Name Nemesis and a Snapcaster Mage and a Council's Judgment. So I think probably getting a more powerful Brainstorm was the correct play. Surprised that he ended up keeping this Pithy Needle. It seems like his game plan, that to me signifies that he knows the matchup really well, and he's worried about Ivugan going late or perhaps a Umezawa's Kite. And he really wanted to be able to Council's Judgment, that Chalice of the Void, and then play a Pithy Needle.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So yeah, I think Yuta also had the line that the game of hiding the Brainstorm, or excuse me, hiding the back to basics on top, getting I don't know, maybe the True Name Nemesis, Thought-Knot Seer, a lot of good options in that hand, untapping, playing back to basics, and then slowing the game down a lot. And then he has True Name, he not. The Pithy Needle in his hand also gives him a little bit of counterplay to a sideboard card like Ratchet. That is one of Kohei's few answers to cards like back to basics.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. You're breaking up a little bit, but something I think you said that is really relevant is that his hand had like 2 answers to a creature and 1 hate card. So if and the hate card being back to basics and the 2 answers being True Name and Council's Judgment. So if he had hid the back to basics and Kohei had played any creature, he could go no matter which answer, even if it was a Thought-Knot Seer and he took one of the answers, no matter which answer it was, he would have been able to play back to basics and then play the answer on the following turn and maybe locked up this game. So perhaps a misstep from the Stoneforge player, but I'm not quite sure what the card is he shuffled away. Maybe it was bad enough and he was worried about like a Wasteland on his Tundra or something like that to really slow the game down.
Yeah, and just getting the quick shot of Kohei's hand here, this game very, very quickly turned from him being in a good position to him being in a poor position. Yuta had a relatively strong hand, and now that there's a True Name Nemesis in play, Kohei can attack effectively, and it actually turns out I believe Yuta has a second one in hand, I think, which we are very likely to see next turn.
Right. The Eldrazi player was priced into taking that back to basics. It's nigh unbeatable in this board state with all his lands tapped, so fighting through this True Name Nemesis is going to be difficult. He's going to need to find a Ratchet Bomb or or something. Oh, there's the Ratchet Bomb. So he needs to hope he can crank this up enough times to get through these True Name Nemesis.
So you're just gonna have a couple turns here to find a disenchant effect, where he'll be able to disenchant the Chalice of the Void on one, and then play Pithing Needle, naming Ratchet Bomb afterwards. So it's that's sort of the fundamental tension of what's going on in this match right now.
Actually, he still has the Council's Judgment, right?
He still has Council's Judgment, so he can just fire that line off this turn if he chooses to. That expends quite a bit of resources from his hand, but
ooh, wow, that's an aggressive attack.
Yeah, that is pretty aggressive. Playing a second True Name.
Yeah, okay. So he's opting to. This makes a lot of sense actually. So since the Ratchet Bomb's going to take a few turns to set up, Yuta's putting more pressure on the battlefield, making that Ancient Tomb way less powerful, and he can just do the Council's Judgment into Pithy Needle line next turn. The risk for this is that if Kohei draws another Thought-Knot Seer on this turn cycle, it could just break up that entire game plan, and then that Ratchet Bomb will need an immediate answer.
Definitely. Kohei also draws City of Traders, which will help stem the bleeding from that Ancient Tomb and the True Name Nemesis attacks.
Actually, that City of Traders was very good because Kohei knows about the Council's Judgment and can now Chalice on 3 to prevent that from coming down. Kohei just needs to get into a position where he can get rid of these True Name Nemesis, and the way he does that is to make sure that this Ratchet Bomb is able to tick up unimpeded. So I think if he plays a Chalice on 3 on this turn, Yuta will need to find a disenchant in order to deal with this Ratchet Bomb. I don't think that the True Name Nemesis is going to kill fast enough to. So the True Name Nemesis is going to Ancient Tomb down to 11 life and then get attacked down to 5. Crank Ratchet Bomb up to 2. So even the True Name Nemesis is a fast enough kill, so that won't work out if he taps the Ancient Tomb. That's unfortunate. Yeah, Chalice on 3 is too slow. These Ancient Tombs have been a huge liability this match for Kohei.
Yeah, and I play Shops in Vintage, and the damage you take off Ancient Tomb is something that's pretty innocuous. You think you're trying to kill your opponent super quickly, but you actually do quite a bit of damage to yourselves, and it makes turning the quarter very, very easy for your opponent. Even the single Ancient Tomb that he's drawn this game is affecting the way he's able to play, and it made even last game it made a much bigger difference where he actually had 3 in play. I actually think he did more damage to himself than Yuta did.
Yeah, and actually thinking back to it, Kohei had played in Ancient Tomb on turn 2 to cast a Chalice of the Void on 1, perhaps to play around a daze, but that extra 2 points of life is actually coming back to bite him because he's unable to tap the Ancient Tomb on this turn cycle. So perhaps Kohei underestimating how much damage he could take from True Name Nemesis early in the game to prevent his development, but I think that's very hard to predict, and playing around days is maybe something that he was worried about because that Chalice of the Void is a very powerful card in this matchup.
Yeah, it's one of the really, really important tools. These blue decks classically have upwards of sometimes 20 cards with a converted mana cost of 1, so a Chalice on 1 can just sometimes mean lights out.
It's worth noting that Stoneforge was kind of unpopular up until the recent Grand Prix in North America in Richmond, I believe it was, where Owen Turdenwald top-8'd with that blue-white Delver Stoneblade deck. And in that deck, if Kohei doesn't know Yuta's exact list, or he didn't see that many cards in Game 1 that really signaled anything, he kind of just saw Stoneforge Mystic. So if he has that Delver Stoneblade deck in his brain, that deck certainly has a fistful of dazes. So perhaps what he was thinking of on that turn too.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially with the line of having a Cavern of Souls in his hand. We would easily be able to play that Chalice on turn 2 without taking any damage. So it looks like he had days on his mind.
So Yuta attacked with 1 True Name, putting Kohei down to 10, which I think is a good play because it's clear that Kohei has already committed to not having this Ancient Tomb anymore, and attacking with both True Name Nemesis could risk you dying to something like a Reality Smasher off the top, and just taking too much damage and not being able to kill in a 2-turn clock. So
Yeah, the other thing to notice is that, there's a Mishra's Factory in play with a Thought-Knot Seer that's 6 power. There's a Matter Reshaper that makes it 9, and then a Walking Ballista, which makes it 13. And the Walking Ballista can go up to 3. So if you double that Walking Ballista's power to 6, assuming you put a third counter on it, that's a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So even on board right now, Kohei can go up to 15 damage in a single attack. So it might look like it's okay for you to attack, but Kohei can put the damage on pretty quick right here.
Yeah, and another thing to note is that often these Eldrazi decks play 1 or 2 copies of Umezawa's Gite, and even just getting one hit with that, the True Name will prevent any counters from ever getting on that, but even just getting one hit with the Gite could swing the race significantly in Kohei's favor.
I think, yeah, I think Kohei has fought back a little bit here, but it still looks like Gite is ahead this game. This matchup really is about the board, and True Name Nemesis is the king of combat, and Yuta has 2 of them in play right now. So it's going to take a couple really good draw steps from Kohei to turn this around.
Especially noting that Yuta's answer to that Ratchet Bomb wasn't a Council's Judgment or a Disenchant, it was a Pithing Needle, which will stop all future copies of Ratchet Bomb as well. And as far as I know, Ratchet Bomb is the most common answer for True Name Nemesis that this Eldrazi deck plays. So unless he has some sort of other answer, it's going to be very difficult for Kohei to break up this board state.
Yeah, and Stoneforge may smell the end here. Or Stoneforge may bring the end here. It's that's a card that is going to be super powerful in the matchup, and Yu is going to be able to slow the game down and just let this Batterskull take over.
Yeah, Batterskull is an interesting one to get here. It doesn't attack very effectively into this board, and I'm wondering if that means he boarded out most of his other equipment. Since on turn 2 in this matchup, you would get Batterskull almost every time, but I feel like if he had like an Umezawa's Gite in his hand, or I doubt he would have Sophie still, but those might have been more powerful options in this spot. But yeah, I think all paths lead to victory, barring some sort of sweeper on this turn, some sort of all his dust effect. So.
Yeah, getting a 3 or 2 mana equipment like Jitter or a Sword would allow him to play it, and there's a handshake.